CC, Eagle Rider, Taboo. These are just a few names from Riot's graveyard of champion concepts, ideas that were imagined but never made it to the Rift. Some were way too overpowered, like they were smurfing in bronze, and others required a PhD to understand because they were even more complex than Aphelios. Seriously, if Aphelios is the final boss of champion complexity, these guys were the hidden bonus round. Imagine a celestial mage glowing with the power of gravity, pulling enemies in like a Fed singed. A mighty warrior flashing and flying across the rift on a legendary eagle, making Quinn look like a grounded birdwatcher. Or a tribal shaman casting forbidden magic so broken it make players rage quit faster than a tea mushroom in a bush.
Hello, ugly.
These aren't just scrapped ideas. They're part of an untold history of champions who could have changed the league forever. But why were they abandoned? What made Riot hit the surrender button at 15 on these champions? And what could have happened if they had joined the champion selection we know today? You won't believe what Riot didn't want you to see. Starting off with one of Riot's most ambitious creations, Ao Xin. Announced back in 2013, Ao Xin was meant to be a storm dragon inspired by Chinese mythology, a celestial guardian capable of summoning thunderstorms and commanding the skies. So basically, if Aurelian Sol and Volibear had a kid, and then gave it Thundering Smite for fun. The concept alone had players hyped. A dragon champion? League had never seen anything like it. Everyone was ready to play as this mythical beast, but as time went on, Ao Xin became less of a reality and more of a campfire story told in the jungle. Years passed with no updates, and fans started to wonder, did Ao Xin DC, or was he just AFK in Riot's files? The truth? Ao Xin was just too ambitious for Riot to handle at the time. His design needed tech that didn't exist yet, like weather effects on the Rift, and his kit was hard to balance. Imagine trying to control a champion who could literally summon storms and still expect bot lane to stay dry. Riot couldn't figure out how to make him balanced without completely sapping the fun out of his kit. Eventually, Riot hit the surrender button on Ao Xin, but his spirit lived on. Years later, we got Aurelian Sol, the Starforger, a celestial dragon who inherited some of Ao Xin's cosmic ideas but left the stormy vibes behind. Ao Xin may have been grounded, but Aurelian made sure dragons would still reign in League skies. But Ao Xin wasn't the only champion Riot sent back to the Void. Speaking of Void, let's descend into the shadows and meet Omen, a terrifying Void creature so bizarre, Riot got scared to unleash him on the Rift. Trust me, this one's a real mystery. Omen, one of Riot's strangest experiments, a champion so mysterious and alien he barely felt like he belonged in League of Legends. Omen was designed to be a predator from the Void, with a sleek, insect-like appearance and glowing, eerie eyes that made it feel like you accidentally queued into a horror game instead of Summoner's Rift. Think Kha'Zix, but if you turned up the creep factor to 11. But as unique as he was, Omen's fate was sealed early. Riot quickly realized that while his concept was fun, and just the right amount of nightmare fuel, he didn't fit League's gameplay. His abilities didn't work together well, and his design felt more like something you'd see in Outlast than on Summoner's Rift. And honestly, if Omen jumped out of a bush, you'd probably Alt F4 faster than a fed Rengar.
Don't fucking run away from me!
Omen was eventually scrapped, and Riot shifted focus to other Void champions like Kha'Zix and Vel'Koz, who brought that alien feel in ways that fit League much better. Still, Omen remains one of Riot's weirdest attempts to push the boundaries of champion design. But if you thought Omen was strange, you're not ready for the next champion on our list. A dark and twisted concept that eventually gave birth to one of League's most iconic champions. Let's talk about Priscilla, the Spider Queen. Riot imagined her up as this creepy badass champion who could swarm her enemies with a ton of spiderlings and lay traps to control the rift. Just picture throwing webs across the map, trapping your opponents, and watching them panic as an army of spiders closes in. She was designed to be terrifying, but also really unique, like Teemo levels of annoying, but with 8 legs instead of 2.
We sure?
The problem? She was just once again way too hard to balance. Her kit relied so much on her spiderlings that if they were strong, she became overpowered, like a Surratt portal on steroids. But if they were weak, Priscilla was completely useless. On top of that, Riot realized not everyone wanted a champion designed to give them actual nightmares. She was just a little too creepy, even for players who put up with fiddlesticks and Cho'Gath. Eventually, Riot scrapped Priscilla, but her spooky spider vibes didn't go away for long. Years later, we got Elise, who took the Spider Queen idea and turned it into something way more balanced and way less horrifying. Priscilla may never have joined the Rift, but without her, we wouldn't have one of League's most iconic junglers. She walked so Elise could skitter. But if you think Priscilla's story is wild, wait until you hear about a celestial mage so weird and ahead of his time that Riot didn't even know how to make him work. Let's dive into one of the coolest looking champions Riot ever thought up, Averdrian. If you've never heard of him, you're not alone. Averdrian was supposed to be this glowing, cosmic-looking mage with floating runes and all kinds of celestial energy swirling around him. Think of someone who looked like they controlled the entire universe, but in champion form. Basically, he was what Teemo thinks he is. On paper, it sounds awesome, right? But the problem was, Averdrian was just way too weird for League. His abilities were so abstract, they might as well have required patch notes just to explain them. Riot couldn't figure out how to make him fun or even understandable for players. Imagine if Aphelios dropped in 2013 with no context. Like, what exactly would a cosmic mage even do? Shoot stars? Summon planets? Channel an eclipse during Baron fights? It didn't really make sense back then. And then there was his design. A glowing blue guy with a floating head didn't exactly match the vibe of champions like Garen or Ashe. He felt more like a character straight out of a sci-fi movie than someone battling it out on Summoner's Rift. So, Riot scrapped him, deciding he was just too much effort for what players were ready for. But here's the thing, Averdrian's cosmic energy wasn't completely wasted. Years later, we got champions like Zoe and Aurelion Sol, who nailed that celestial theme and gave it a proper place in the game. So even though Averdrian never made it, his legacy lives on, and honestly, the Rift is probably better for it. But enough about space wizards. Let's switch it up and talk about a champion who could literally control the jungle, with roots and vines that shaped the Rift itself. Yeah, this one's wild. Let's dig into Gavid, the Plant King, a champion concept that Riot almost unleashed on Summoner's Rift. Imagine this, a massive ancient force of nature with a body made of living wood, glowing green energy, and the power to control the jungle. Gavid wasn't just another champion, he was Riot's attempt to make the map itself fight back. Picture roots erupting from the ground like Maokai's ultimate on steroids, vines blocking off paths like terrain, and plants sprouting up to heal allies or snare enemies. Basically, Gavid would have been your worst nightmare if you ever forgot to buy a control ward. It was a crazy idea, but like a lot of crazy ideas, it just didn't work out. Riot realized that Gavid's gameplay would be once again impossible to balance. His ability to change the terrain sounded amazing on paper, but in practice, it was way too complicated and completely overpowered. I mean, how do you even counter someone who could reshape the map while you're just trying to farm camps? It's like trying to play dodgeball while someone keeps moving the walls. And then there was his design. Gavid was supposed to feel ancient and powerful, like the jungle itself had come alive. But Riot couldn't make him stand out enough to feel truly unique. When they eventually scrapped him, Riot took some of his plant-based ideas and repurposed them for other champions, like Syra, who brought the whole summoning plants vibe to life in a much simpler and more manageable way. Gavit might never have ruled the jungle, but his influence is still rooted in League's history. And speaking of roots, let's branch out to the next champion concept. A mystical tribal shaman with a dark side who was scrapped because his design hit a little too close to controversy. This one's a story you definitely won't want to miss. Taboo, a champion concept that Riot had to put away for reasons that might surprise you. Taboo was designed as a mystical tribal shaman, drawing power from dark forbidden magic. He had this eerie vibe, with glowing runes carved into his skin and spirits swirling around him. His kit? It was all about summoning and controlling spiritual energy to disrupt enemies and protect allies. Riot wanted Taboo to feel ancient and mysterious, like the kind of champion who'd make you think twice before face-checking a bush. Spoiler, you'd still go in and regret it.
They have to. Baker found score on the run. Oh my gosh, the net can't get over the wall, and he takes up.
But while Taboo's concept was cool, Riot ran into a major problem. His design hit a little too close to real-world tribal themes. Players worried that his appearance and abilities could come off as disrespectful or culturally insensitive. Riot, understandably, wanted to avoid any backlash, so they decided to scrap Taboo before he even made it past the early concept stage. They probably didn't want another "how did this get past Q&A" moment. Still, Taboo wasn't a complete loss. Riot took inspiration from his summoner-style abilities and spiritual vibe for later champions like Ivern and his playful take on nature magic, and even a bit of Maokai, who's basically a haunted tree but still gives off that ancient, mystical energy. Taboo might never have haunted the Rift, but his spirit lives on in League's design DNA. Next up is Rob Blackblade, a rogue pirate with dual cursed swords and a past so dark Riot didn't know how to bring him to life. Rob was one of Riot's most daring champion concepts. Picture a swashbuckler with a reckless streak, wielding two cursed black swords that gave him immense power at a cost. His kit was designed to match his wild nature, with flashy, high-risk plays that could snowball the game, or backfire so hard you'd be the reason your team spammed FF at 15. He was supposed to feel like the embodiment of chaos, someone who could dominate fights, but always hovered dangerously close to feeding. But here's the thing. Riot just couldn't figure out how to make him work. His dual swords, which were central to his identity, were, and yes again, a balancing nightmare. Back in the day, Riot really had problems balancing champions, I guess. Some things never change, do they? The idea was that they'd give him massive power spikes, but come with a drawback, like draining health or leaving him vulnerable to counterattacks. But no matter how they tweaked it, Rob was either the kind of champion who made you uninstall, or the kind of champion you forgot was even in the game. And then there was his design. Rob's gritty rogue pirate vibe clashed with League's existing pirate champions, like Gangplank and Misfortune. Riot worried he'd feel too similar, like Gangplank's edgier little brother who showed up late to the party. In the end, Rob Blackblade was sent to the depths of Riot's concept vault, never to see the light of day, or the Rift. But his story doesn't end there. Riot later revisited the rogue pirate archetype with Pyke, giving us a darker, more sinister take that captured some of Rob's chaotic energy. Pyke took the rogue pirate theme and turned it into something that truly felt unique. So while Rob never made it to the Rift, his spirit lives on in the shadows of the depths, right where it belongs. But now, let's dive deep into the waters of Summoner's Rift. Meet Well, a water-themed champion with a design so fluid and out of this world that Riot just couldn't figure it out. Well was imagined as the living embodiment of the ocean itself, flowing and shifting like an endless tide. Riot wanted him to feel like a living wave, with abilities that harnessed the tides to control the rivers in the Rift. Imagine waves crashing into enemies like a high tide on bot lane, tides empowering allies like a mini Baron buff, and whirlpools dragging opponents to their doom like a thresh hook you couldn't escape from. He had the potential to reshape teamfights in ways no other champion could. But designing a champion as unique as well came with a flood of challenges. First, Riot struggled to give him a kit that felt impactful but wasn't completely broken. A champion controlling water sounds incredible, but how do you make abilities like waves or tides stand out without them feeling repetitive? Or worse, like a spammable Sivir Q? Then there was his appearance. Riot couldn't decide if he should look like a humanoid figure made out of water or something more alien like an elemental drake with arms. Either way, his visual design just didn't click with the league's lineup at the time. Eventually, Riot decided to shelve well, but his watery essence wasn't lost completely. Champions like Nami captured some of his elegance with their water magic, and even the ocean drake and its terrain changes might owe a little something to Well's original concept. While he never made it to the Rift, his ideas still ripple through the game to this day. But if you thought Well's story was unique, wait until you hear about the next champion on our list. A Sky Warrior who almost brought aerial combat to League of Legends. This concept pushed the limits of what a champion could be, and trust me, you don't want to miss this one. Meet Eagle Rider, one of Riot's most ambitious concepts. Imagine a champion who didn't just roam the Rift, but dominated it from above, mounted on a massive eagle with golden feathers and razor-sharp wings. Eagle Rider was designed as a sky-roaming warrior who could strike fear into enemies from the skies, flashing down to deliver devastating attacks before retreating to safety. Basically, if Quinn and Aurelion Sol had a badass bird-loving child, this would have been it. It was a concept unlike anything League had seen before. But as incredible as it sounds, bringing Eagle Rider to life was no small task. Riot faced a huge challenge in figuring out how a flying champion would even work in a game like League. Should the eagle give them constant mobility, making jungle gangs look like pigeon dive bombs? Should they be able to hover over terrain like a flying Teemo ward? And let's be honest, how do you balance a champion that can just avoid all ground-based abilities? The mechanics were as hard to pin down as the old Akali with 3 dashes left. And then there was the aesthetic. While the idea of a majestic eagle-riding champion sounds cool, Riot struggled to make it stand out. League already has heavily thematic champions like Quinn and Valor, and adding Eagle Rider risked making the two feel redundant. Personally, I would have just said, let's go for it. But at last, Riot had other plans. In the end, Riot grounded Eagle Rider for good, but the dream of aerial combat wasn't entirely forgotten. Still, a champion riding a giant eagle? Imagine the chaos in Baron Pit fights. Missed opportunity, Riot. Missed opportunity. However, while Eagle Rider never came to the Rift, Riot's creativity wasn't just limited to the skies. Let's turn our attention to a champion who stayed much closer to home. CC, a brilliant Yordle engineer who might have brought a whole new level of invention to League. CC, one of Riot's most innovative champion concepts, was a Hextech genius with a knack for chaos. Picture a tiny Yordle with oversized goggles, a tool belt packed with gadgets, and a personality as explosive as Ziggs on a bad day. Riot envisioned her as a support champion who could control the Rift with traps, turrets, and other mechanical creations. Basically, Heimerdinger's equally brilliant, slightly chaotic cousin who probably blows things up for fun. The idea was to give CC a kit that would let players craft gadgets and set up clever plays, but Riot ran into some big problems during development. First, her abilities were obviously a balancing nightmare. If her gadgets were too strong, she'd feel more oppressive than a fed Teemo camping bushes.
Gotti, come here, yeah!
But if they were too weak, she felt utterly useless, like a support who forgot to buy wards. And let's not forget, Riot worried she overlapped too much with champions like Heimerdinger and Ziggs, who already had the whole chaotic gadget user thing locked down. In the end, Riot decided to scrap CC, and while some of her Hextech ideas found their way into other champions, her specific vision was left behind. Still, it's hard not to wonder what could have been if this energized engineer had joined the Rift. Would she have redefined the support role, creating plays that made even Thresh mains jealous? Or would she have been that one champ your ADC blames when the lane goes south? Either way, CC's potential will forever live in the what-ifs of League history. And with that, we've come to the end of Riot's graveyard of champions. Or have we? Some concepts never made it far enough to get a full story, but still left their mark in the game's development. Let's take a look at a few honorable mentions, unreleased champions you've probably never heard of, but still deserve a moment in the spotlight. Don't go anywhere. First, we have Avasha, a wind spirit champion who was meant to embody the freedom and power of the skies, much like Eagle Rider. Think of her as the love child of Janna and Yasuo, minus the toxicity. Her abilities might have included summoning gusts of wind to knock back enemies, or raining down tornadoes from above to control zones in teamfights. Basically, she could have been your team's best zoning tool, or your worst nightmare if you were caught in her storm. Riot eventually abandoned her, but her design left its mark, inspiring champions like Janna and Yasuo, who brought that windy magic to life. Except, without the skydiving eagle part. Then there's Seth. Not Set, but Seth. A shadowy and mysterious champion concept that Riot never quite figured out. Seth's kit likely revolved around stealth and ambush mechanics, with abilities like disappearing into shadows or creating decoys to confuse enemies. Kind of like Shaco's ult, but, actually different. He was meant to be the ultimate sneak attack champion, the kind of guy who'd make you paranoid to even leave your turret. While Seth was eventually scrapped, his name, and maybe even a little bit of his dark, edgy vibe, lived on in Set, the boss we know today. Though, let's be real, Set has way more charm and a much better workout routine. Another mention goes to the Burly Brawler, an early tank concept designed to be a bruiser with raw, unstoppable power. Picture a massive wall of muscle charging into enemies to break their formations, or shaking off damage with an unbreakable shield, like Braum, but with zero time for friendship and all about smashing. While the Burly Brawler was scrapped, his beefy, no-nonsense style likely influenced some of League's most iconic tanks, like Braum and Ornn. Basically the champions who make ADCs feel safe, or trapped, depending on which side you're on. Personally, I would have loved to see Omen. To me, he sounds like Nocturne's scarier, creepier cousin, the one who shows up uninvited to every shadow-themed family reunion. But honestly, Tabo would have been really cool too, since we still don't have a proper tribal shaman champion in the game. I mean, come on, Riot, where's the guy who can summon ancient spirits and make me regret face-checking a bush? Which of these champions would you bring to life? Would you want to see Eagle Rider flying through the rift, diving into teamfights from above? Or Gavid turning the jungle into his own personal death trap? Or maybe you've got your own ideas for how Riot could have made these wild concepts work. Let me know your thoughts. I'm genuinely curious which of these forgotten champions sparks your imagination the most. Who knows, maybe Riot's listening and we'll see one of these concepts reborn someday.